debt was not nearly what it is today. So I guess I'd like to begin, since we're here, saying I got to go to see a couple of the advanced manufacturing operations, and that's the future I want for all Americans. And I think our country should operate the way community colleges operate. I mean, think about it. Think about all the stuff you read in the headlines and all the back and forth and everything. If the country was open to everyone, without regard to race, religion, or anything else, if people without regard to their income had a chance to learn something that would allow them to live their dreams and live up to their full potential, and if everyone could actually get a job that pays not a minimum wage but a living wage with the prospect of growth, about 90% of our problems would go away. And those that exist, we would solve at the local level together. The greatest gift the state of South Carolina has given the country was given by the parishioners of Reverend Senator Pinckney's church, who forgave that deeply troubled young man who never should have had a gun in the first place for what he did. And that freed the spirits of the South Carolina legislators, many of them members, not members of my party, to take the Confederate flag down. Because, as the direct descendant of Jefferson Davis said in the best 4-minute speech I've heard in a long time, if I can get over this, so do you. We got to build a future together. And the whole premise of Hillary's campaign is that we got to make America work again. We got to end the political gridlock and open the doors of opportunity to all Americans. The reason there's so much anger and frenzy and frustration in both parties in this campaign is that what the president said in the last State of the Union is true, but it's not true for everybody. That is, what he said is, our economy is outperforming any other big economy on earth. That's true. Europeans are in a rut. China's been going down. Brazil's having terrible trouble. Japan can't get out of its recession. And we've had 14 million jobs in 5 years. We've got over 90% of our people with health insurance for the first time in history, but 80% of the people haven't had a pay raise. And you got all these young millennials that graduated from college with a passel full of debt. And we were talking about this before. If they had gone to community college first and had a usable skill, they could have worked their way through the rest of college and it wouldn't have happened. But there's so many people with so much debt that they're still living at home with their parents, and they can't move out and pay their college debt and rent. And they think they're never going to be able to own their own home. They're never going to be able to go to the bank and borrow money to start a business. They're just stuck. So what her whole campaign is removing the barriers to everybody fully participating in our prosperity, to removing the barriers to everybody participating in our society. And to do that, we've got to do it together. It just depends on whether what you believe about what the best way to do it is. But we need shared prosperity, we need equal opportunity, and we need an inclusive community where everybody is equal and a participant. And we need to keep the world safe so all the crazy stuff that's going on doesn't come home to haunt us. And we learned in San Bernardino that that's not just a matter of helping our friends, the Kurds and the Arabs who are trying to beat ISIS in Syria and Iraq. It's a matter of winning the battle of minds over the social media. The people that did all that killing out there in San Bernardino, they never went anywhere. They went into cyberspace and were lulled by a crazy argument. Think about it. Have I got a deal for you? You can go straight to heaven if you take 50 years off your own life expectancy. But only if you also take 50 years off the life expectancy of totally innocent people who never did anything to you and robbed them of their lives. If we can't beat that argument, shame on us. But we all got to do it together. We got to do it across racial lines and religious lines. 99+% of Americans Muslims hate what they did as much as you do. We need them. We shouldn't demonize the religion. We should criticize and attack wrongdoing wherever it occurs. But we ought to say, if we're all willing to give up the wrongdoing, we can go forward together. That's the whole premise of Hillary's campaign. Invest in new jobs. Invest in community colleges. Make community college free. Make college free for, in terms of tuition and books, for working class and low-income people. Give everybody else some aid and work-study opportunities. Let the wealthier people pay their own way. Don't waste the money putting that in the government, and use our tax money to create new jobs in infrastructure and in clean energy. We can be the clean energy capital of the universe. We were talking about bringing all these manufacturing jobs back to South Carolina. You know why that's happening? Because wages are increasingly a smaller part of a manufacturer's cost. And energy, materials, and transportation costs are a larger percentage. So we don't need to import manufacturing goods anymore, and we can pay good wages if we train people properly, if we get more of the materials sourced here or as near to here as we can, and if we do everything we can to keep energy costs down. Iowa, Minnesota, and Texas, believe it or not, the oil capital of America, get a third of their energy today from the wind. Iowa has the cheapest electricity in the United States, 5.8 cents a kilowatt hour. That's New York, where I live, is the most expensive at 13.9. So New York City's growing like crazy, but it's mostly in high-tech jobs because we have energy costs that are too prohibitive to make us competitive in most manufacturing. You don't have to worry about that. But the lower we drive these costs by using our resources to create independent energy that can't be taken away from us, the better we'll do. Also keep your neighbors in South Florida from being flooded out when the worst consequences of climate change occur. And your neighbors in South Carolina along the coasts. So we got to do this together. And we have to deal with problems that are more than just the economy in order to have everybody participate together. That's why we need sentencing reform in prisons and police reform, not because we don't like the police, but because we need them. But there need to be more police that look like the communities they represent. And they need to be walking the streets, and anytime something bad happens, they need to resolve it like I bet you do here. When all these police riots were going on, there was a young male, I can't remember whether he's African American or Hispanic, who was killed in Los Angeles. And I kept waiting for the demonstrations. I kept waiting for the uproar. Nothing happened, so I called a friend out there and he said, back in the 90s when you were president, and we'd had the Rodney King killings, those of you of a certain age can remember that. We changed everything. Now we have neighborhood councils. And whenever something bad happens, the neighborhood meets with the police. The supervisors come in. And the first thing we do is get agreement on what happened. Once you agree on what actually happened, it's fairly simple to decide what to do. So he said, you won't find that in the places where the neighborhoods are working. We know we need the police. We saw those people in San Bernardino risk their lives, those police officers, to save people without regard to their race or religion or anything else. They were just going in, doing their job. That's what we want again. We got to do it like you run this community college, together. And the president can do a lot to take the barriers down, to press sentencing reform, to press police reform. But what's going to happen when we let all these young people out of prison? They need to be trained in prison and when they get out so they can do what those young people I saw in this community college are doing. We don't have anybody to waste. We're younger than any other big economy on earth. That's one of the reasons we're doing well is we're younger. Having lost it, I can tell you, youth matters. The age of the workforce matters. The reason this guy and people like him all over America are kind of heroes to me is that they are empowering people without regard to their race and background to live their dreams. We got to do it together. To do it, you got to say, okay, we need, for African Americans, police reform and sentencing reform, and we need reasonable background checks because gun violence is the primary cause of death among young African American males. Its primary is understatement. It's more than the next 9 causes put together. It's crazy. And since 85 to 90% of gun owners agree with us, we ought to be able to work together to persuade people that the people that are against this are only able to prevail because they scare the living daylights out of the gun owners to think this is the first step in getting your gun. One of the reasons I was able to pass the background check law and the assault weapons ban is that I'm from Arkansas, where more than half the people have a hunting license. And a lot of people live in the country and have to have a gun to protect themselves because the police can't get there for 50 minutes. And nobody could convince enough people that I was fixing to take their guns away. All I ask our fellow Americans to do is keep your guns to hunt, to sport shoot, to protect your family, but don't begrudge us 3 days to do a background check so 1 million felons, fugitives, stalkers, domestic abusers didn't get guns. And they say today to people that are against this, well, there's so many guns out there now, we messed it up so bad you can't fix it. That's like saying there's so many cars on the road, we don't need a speed limit. There's so many cars on the road, we don't need child protection seats. There's so many cars on the road, and there's a constitutional right to travel and a constitutional right to free speech. You ought to be able to talk on your cell phone while you're driving 60 miles an hour. Like, we wouldn't take that in any other argument. We say we're Americans and we're all willing to accommodate each other to meet the needs. That's what we got to think about. But you got to have a president to lead that, but then once you do that, you got to have a community where people trust each other to live together and work together. We got to take down these barriers. The Hispanic Americans, they need to know we're really not going to deport them all because the American economy would collapse. But we're not going to let people who didn't come here with documents jump ahead those who did in the application for citizenship. We're not interested in running these young dreamers off who are also Asians who are going to make a huge contribution to our society, but nobody can get ahead of the people who followed the old law. We got to have some rules and some freedom. We have to deal with the fact that this prescription drug and opium epidemic is killing the heart of America. And it's dominating small towns and rural areas. It's interesting. West Virginia, which is not too far from here, has a small African American population, a small Hispanic population, a negligible Asian population, and the highest rate of prescription drug and opium abuse in America, and the second weakest economy. Why? Because they don't have enough people like the students in this school, enough institutions like this, and enough new investment in tomorrow's economy. So all these people who worked in the coal industry, where employment, believe it or not, peaked 96 years ago.
Wow.
And coal production peaked 65 years ago. And nobody's done anything to help them create a new economy like you're doing here. And the two things are related. This epidemic of drug and heroin abuse gripping rural America is killing people who really are dying of a broken heart because they think all their tomorrows are going to be just like yesterday. A lot of people in this room, especially older people, have made huge sacrifices, have undergone huge difficulties. But you can always do better as long as you think you got a chance to make tomorrow different from yesterday.